All right, thank you everybody for joining the financial session today for Data Days. My name is Chris Cho. I'm with EADI, and I'm also joined by Megan Fitzsimmons, who is from PBS, and she's going to help with some questions that we may have and bring some perspective from the business services side. So today's presentation, the main goal is to give you guys a primer on financial data at Georgia Tech. And we know there's lots of interest from various different populations on campus for financial data. So we really hope that um, everybody here can have some takeaways from this session, maybe a couple of tips and tricks, some reports that you may have not seen. But we also want to give you some context to what data looks like primarily within Workday as the primary source of financial data at Georgia Tech. So for our agenda today, we're going to give you a brief introduction to data at Georgia Tech and in Workday. We're going to talk about some of the reports and dashboards that are available to campus. I'm going to give you some tips on how to navigate Workday as it relates to finding certain types of data. And then we're excited for some upcoming features that we want to share with you that hopefully will make it easier for people to look for data and to assess data, and then also talk about challenges that we actually have with financial data. Um, so what does financial data look like at Georgia Tech? So we generally can categorize financial data. I know financial data is a very broad term, but we see kind of three categories to different types of financial data, generally speaking. So we have accounting data. This is sort of your core financial data that you'll find in Workday. These are accounting journals, transaction-based, or even just ledger accounts and reports, financial statements. Then we have transactional data. So this is a lot of the activity that happens across campus. These are your expense reports, your invoices to suppliers, customer invoices, a lot of the activity that happens with the procurement and supplier accounts area. And then we also have like a third category, which we call support activities. And these are the activities that support all the financial areas across campus, such as budgets and sponsored research. So as far as the populations that support and use financial data, there are various different organizations that, or various different teams across campus that we all work with to support different aspects of financial data. So on the IT side, we have enterprise data services and applications. Then we also have the central offices in finance and planning, the various central office divisions, such as the controller's office, the budget's office, grants and contracts. And then we also have other organizations that have Georgia Tech affiliations, such as Georgia Tech Athletic Association, GTRI. And so we kind of have three buckets here, and all of these groups work together to support the different areas of finance across campus. So in terms of sources of data for financial data, as you can see, we consider Workday the primary source of financial data. But Workday is not the only source of financial data. In fact, there are many sources that feed into Workday, and also some points that we feed out of Workday, such as the enterprise data warehouse. So we'll get to that a little bit later, but all of these uh, points interact with Workday, and we see Workday typically as the primary source of financial data. So this presentation is going to be very much geared toward Workday. So to start off with some actual data, talking about data days. So To give you an idea of kind of the volume of financial data that we're working with in Workday, last year in FY22, we had 1.6 million accounting journals. So these are combinations of accounting journals that groups across campus enter in manually. We have integrations that create accounting journals. We also have transactions that create accounting journals. But you can see that 1.6 million, and if you split that out into each journal line, we have 19.5 million. So the population of financial data is really vast in Workday. And so the challenge is, how do we collect the data that we really want and the data that's relevant to us, and be able to look at that data efficiently? We're always working towards doing better, and we welcome feedback, but some of what I'm going to talk about in this presentation, we want to make sure that we have the tools that we can look at the data that we really need, because there's so much data in the system. But I think some of these numbers are just cool to look at. We have a large campus. So if you actually zoom out and you see all of these different types of transactions, there is a lot of data in Workday. So this gives you some good context. But what does financial data look like in Workday as it relates to the structure of the data? So I just want to touch on this very briefly, but you can kind of consider each different type of record in the Workday system. They're labeled as business objects. So you may have a supplier contract, a customer invoice. Those are all considered a business object. And each individual instance of these objects are kind of stored in a folder, you can call it. And each folder is representative of a business object with multiple instances. And so that's how we view the data as it relates to how we're going to report and how we're going to look at pieces of data within Workday. So within a business object, let's say, for example, you're looking at expense reports. You also have relationships from these business objects to other business objects. So an expense report has relationships to employees, in the sense that who is the employee that the expense report should be paid to? Who is the person that created the expense report? So these are links between different pieces of data that connect within the context of business objects. You may have a spend authorization that was created before the expense report, and there's that link there. And when we create reports, that's how we can identify, okay, this expense report relates to this spend authorization. And so the business object has a relationship to another business object. Each business object is going to have some other key attributes as well that may be another business object, or may just be other pieces of financial data. These are the primary pieces of financial data that we consider to be key attributes when we're looking at financial data. So almost all of our financial data has some kind of work tag associated with it. And these, a lot of people call them the driver work tags. There are also work tags that just in general identify what the context of that financial data is. So some examples, you have funding sources, you have function, program, all of those are work tags. Then we have different types of dates. So dates are not a business object, but they're an attribute to financial data. So you have different types of dates, and you want to know the difference between the accounting date, for example, and a budget date or a transaction date. Organizations, so company and cost center, primary organizations. Documents, like I said before, if you're looking at an expense report, you have relationships to a spend authorization. So those are other business objects that are still key attributes to that piece of financial data. Then we have amounts. Most of our financial data that are transaction-based have amounts. And then we have ledger activity data. So we have ledger account, revenue category, spend category. And that is really used in reporting for financial statements and such. So getting access to financial data. So if you want to access the system, any employee at GT has access to Workday. Their access is governed by the Workday roles that they are assigned. So based on your job function and the data access that you need, those roles are going to be assigned to you, and typically they're governed by some central office folks, such as the controller's office. And then we also want to just point out that GTR data is protected. So we do a lot of work on the back end to make sure that that data is segmented from the rest of campus. As far as accessing reports, we have a lot of reports that are available to all users. Again, some of these reports are related to GTR data, and we make sure that when we design these reports, we can secure them in a way that they can't be accessed unless you're within that GTRI organization. Additionally, we have some reports that may be only available to you if you have certain roles or certain security access. So those reports are more specialized and more specific in function. So one example is the Sabre report, which is used in the context of sponsored programs and reporting on expenses. So as far as requesting access, so if you're looking to access financial reports, financial data in Workday, like I said, this is governed by Workday rules. And this goes for Workday reports as well as Light reports. And the way you want to request access is go into ServiceNow, and you'll find the access request within ServiceNow. And once you put that in, like I said, the controller's office is usually the primary org that governs the access. As far as getting self-service financial data, so we have some data available in areas such as the data warehouse. This is available via data stewardship request, and that's processed by the enterprise data services team. So reporting and tools available in Workday. So the main tools that we have within Workday to look at financial data are reports, and then we also have dashboards. Primarily, we're going to be looking at reports. And just to give you some context, to help you identify the types of reports that you need, just want to give you the reporting kind of structure in Workday as well. So looking again at a business object like an expense report, we use report fields to populate our report definitions. And these go back to the attributes that I mentioned earlier. So these are different attributes related to financial data. And then we also have data sources within each of these business objects. So it's important for us when we're developing a report to identify the correct data source. So data source is within a business object. You can have sort of buckets of how the system looks for that data. And this is going to be a big factor in how efficient a report is in looking for data. So for example, you have expense reports for company, and then you have expense reports for worker. So these are two different ways that we can look for expense report data in the system. So some more data here, numbers on how often reports were used in FY22. So we have 844,000 times reports were run in the last year. So that's quite a number. As far as user interface, so these are people running reports within the UI. These account for about 200,000. So you can see that reports are not only run by people who are searching for reports, we also utilize reports in many other ways within Workday to help us leverage all the financial data that's within the system. So we have a lot of integrations that rely on reports. So we use certain pieces of data to either feed to other systems or feed into Workday and perform different functions. We also have sub-reports. So when we have a report that comprises of different data sources and we want to put that together, that's called a composite report. And we need to create multiple reports to make up that one report. And those run sort of in the background when you are actually running that composite report. And then we also have reports that we kind of label as alert processing. And these are reports that will send out notifications to folks based on certain actions that are required or certain tasks that are past due. And so we're starting to utilize that a bit more as we mature in our Workday Financials support model. But you'll see that some folks may receive notifications for certain things, especially within the expenses area. So going into some of the more popular Workday reports, so the top 5 reports that were used in the last year. So we have what we call the Sabre suite of reports. This is the sponsored award budget expense report, the primary used for grants reporting. This was the most used report last year, run over 32,000 times. Then we have the EBR, the expense budgetary balance report. This is run over 14,000 times. Other funding sources, funding by gift and designated. And then we have, you may be familiar with all the find reports, as we term it in Workday. So find expense reports by org, find purchase order by org. And these are very popular reports in Workday, which you may already be familiar with. So I've just listed this out here. I just wanted to give you guys some context for reports that are commonly used that maybe you want to list. So feel free to take a screenshot of this. We'll also have the presentation materials that we can distribute for later. But see if there are any reports on here that maybe you haven't used before or you never heard of. And I'll go into how you may be able to find these reports in Workday. But there are a lot of reports that we create as custom reports, and there are also a lot of reports that come with Workday Standard. And we acknowledge that it may be hard sometimes for folks to find certain reports, but we are constantly working on solutions to kind of drill into the reports that you might find pertinent or relevant to your area. Then we also have dashboards in Workday, and admittedly, dashboards, I think, have much less activity. This is something that we are really working towards as one of our priorities in improvement. So we want to be able to create more dashboards for the campus so that they can find data easier and put different pieces of data together all in one place. So it's more convenient for them to find that information. But here are some of the more popular dashboards. So we have the delegation dashboard, the campus reporting dashboard, which I'll show you guys later in this presentation. The campus reporting dashboard is going to be the go-to dashboard to find a lot of the different reports, custom reports that we have available for you in all the different areas of financials. We have the general operations dashboard, the My Procurement dashboard, and we also have a light financial reporting dashboard, which list out certain reports that can link you to the Light website. So with that, I want to get into a quick demo. So for those of you who aren't familiar with dashboards, the way you would find a dashboard is in the section called Your Top Apps. These are where you list out the dashboards that you can access. You can go to View All Apps. And then the campus reporting dashboard should automatically be available to you in the apps section. If it's not, you can click on Add Apps and search for it there and then add it. But if you click on Campus Reporting Dashboard, it'll open up this page, sort of like a hub. And there are several tabs here that are broken out by different areas of finance. And we list the most popular and relevant reports for each of these areas within this campus reporting dashboard. So this is a really good place to go if you're maybe looking for certain reports, or if you have a group of reports that you kind of run all the time, but you want to go somewhere that can link to them easily. The campus reporting dashboard is a good hub. So we have financial and FDM reports. We have sponsored reports related to grants and awards. We have the procurement area reports. So these have a lot of reports about purchasing and open requisitions and purchase orders. We have asset management reports, gift reports, and facilities and auxiliary management reports. So from any of these tabs, you can click on directly on these report links here, and they'll open up that report for you. So it's really easy to navigate two different reports from this dashboard. So we highly recommend, if you don't use this dashboard, that you go check it out. There's a lot of good reports on here. And this would be the first recommendation as far as where should you go if you're looking for a report or you don't know what to search. Check the campus reporting dashboard as your first go-to. So we also have a number of reports available in Light. And the way you can access Light, you can access Light through the TechWorks portal. So if you're familiar with TechWorks, you can access Light through there. And there is a section for financials. So there are a number of financials reports that you can access through Light. And the benefit to Light is that it leverages other tools that are really great in reporting. It's called Tableau and Cognos. They have some more capabilities that may not be available in Workday. And so there's different capabilities that can be leveraged when you're accessing some of these Light tools, Light reports. So there are some useful reports here as well. Some of these reports come out of the Enterprise Data Warehouse, and the EDW team is working on creating a financial data model. And so a lot of the reporting in Light comes out of there. All right, so what are some tips for navigating Workday for financial data? So there are a couple things that we can do that I want to highlight. So search prefixes. And let me go back into the tenant here. So there are ways that you can search within the Workday search tab that enable you to kind of go to a specific instance of a record in Workday quicker. And these are called search prefixes. So if you actually type in the question mark into the search bar and hit enter, you can see a list of all the search prefixes that Workday lets you use. And what that does is it narrows down your search to a specific type of record, financial data in Workday. So for example, let's say we want to search for a grant. You can always type in a keyword into the search bar, but you'll notice that you may not be looking, or you may not be getting the result that you're looking for because your keyword may be very general. If you're looking for a grant specifically, you can type in grant : and type in that keyword, and then it helps you narrow down your search. And if you press enter, the results will do the same. So if I'm looking for a specific grant, I want to be sure that I type in this keyword as a prefix. So we can do this with a lot of different things. We can do this with different types of business documents, expense report, supplier invoice. And the best thing to do is just click on that, or just type in that question mark and look for the prefix within this table. And as you get used to using it, it'll definitely come more naturally. The other thing I want to show you is there is something called a sitemap within Workday. So if you click on your profile and you come down here to sitemap, the sitemap is going to identify for you all of the available reports and tasks that you have within Workday based on the different financial areas. So let's say, for example, I want to see what I can do within the expenses area. So I come to my sitemap and I click on expenses. Here are all the standard reports that Workday gives me within the expenses area and all of the different tasks I have access to as well. So the only thing that won't show up here are your custom reports. But a lot of the standard reports that we still use, you'll see that here in the sitemap. So just browse the sitemap and see maybe there are things that you didn't know were available. But you can narrow down to the area that you're interested in. And then you'll see a lot of information here. The last thing I want to point out is when it comes to looking for reports, there are certain keywords that will help you to finding reports that we have built and also standard Workday reports that are out there. So you may know that a lot of the reports have find as like the first word, and that's a typical Workday standard practice. So if you type in find, that's a good keyword for you to use just to find the different reports that are available. And this will be across any function, any financial area. So find is a good keyword. As far as custom reports go, we also make sure that we use certain naming conventions when we build the custom reports. So if you type in GTCR, Georgia Tech Custom Report, so that's a good keyword to look for custom reports that we have. And if you come down here to tasks and reports, you'll find all of the reports that have this in the name. and this identifies that it's a custom report. You can even put in another keyword combined with that if you want to narrow it down to a certain area. The next thing I want to mention is we want to make sure that we're using the correct report as well. So often there are different reports that can get you the same or similar data, but knowing when to use which report is really key at certain times. So if we come back to an expense report, for an example, if we look at two different scenarios, scenario one, I need to find all of my expense reports from the past year. So you may know that there are two different reports to look for expense reports. You have the My Expense Reports report, and you also have Find Expense Reports by organization. But if you're looking for just your own expense reports, the correct report to use is My Expense Reports. The reason why is Workday is going to look at your subset of expense reports when looking for that data. So maybe you want to look specifically within the time frame. You can enter that into the parameters, but then it's not going to look through every single expense report that's out there in the system. It's just going to look through your expense reports that match the parameters. And so that's going to result in a much quicker report output time than looking at Find Expense Reports by organization. Because Find Expense Reports by organization, you can put in your employee ID into the payee field, but then what you're telling the system to do is look at all the expense reports that are out there and find mine. So you can see it's some sample execution times. The My Expense Reports runs in less than a second, whereas if you do the same search with a different report, that may take almost half a minute. On the other hand, if you want to find all your cost center expense reports for the month, let's say, then the correct report is to use the Find Expense Reports by organization. Obviously, My Expense Reports isn't going to get you the expense reports for other folks that are in your cost center. So that's an appropriate use of using the Find Expense Reports by organization, because you're able to put in some additional parameters there, and the system will expand its search to other areas. So as far as upcoming features, we're really excited about some of these projects that we're working on. First, Workday Adaptive Planning. So right now we're implementing a product called Adaptive Planning, which will let us report on financial data, primarily accounting data, in different ways that we can't necessarily do in Workday. And we can also build in some planning tools, some budgeting tools that can let us combine all that together and in a more Excel type format. And in collaboration with Adaptive, we also have certain Excel tools that we can utilize so that we can kind of pull in data into a table or Excel format and therefore do some more advanced calculations that we necessarily couldn't do in Workday. We also have some robotic process automation tools that we are currently developing. And these have been really useful in working pieces of data within Workday and other systems to automate tasks that are taking up manual, tedious time within different groups of campus. Discovery boards is also a project that's coming up. And discovery boards is a way that we can visualize and put together data in a drag and drop format. And similar to how your pivot tables and charts work in Excel, that's what discovery boards aims to do. So you can take different subsets of data right within Workday and drag and drop different elements to create tables of data. And so this is very powerful ad hoc reporting capability that we don't currently have for a lot of users in Workday. So we're excited to eventually release the discovery board capability to users. And then, as I mentioned, within the enterprise data warehouse team, they are working on a lot of initiatives to build different Tableau and Cognos reports that will help in financial reporting areas. So lastly, some challenges that we acknowledge with financial data. It's difficult to see certain historical data on state budgets. We also acknowledge that with all of these different systems that feed into Workday, we don't necessarily grab all the details that you might see if you went to those external systems themselves. So Workday doesn't always have all those financial pieces of data. So we acknowledge that that is can make it difficult to report on certain things. And as I mentioned before, GTR security, that is more so a challenge for us on the back end, but we want to make sure that we always have that in place so that sensitive data isn't widely available. So with that, there's some ways that you can learn more about reporting within Workday. And additionally, we have training available as far as report writing. So I think we're approaching time, so I want to leave some time for questions. So I didn't see if there are any questions in the chat. Megan, did you see any questions?
I kind of replied to stuff, but if anybody's got anything else, we're here. Let us know.
Thank you all so much. Curious if you can share some examples of the AI or robotic functions that are kind of being replaced, the tactical, tedious things you mentioned. Could you share some examples?
We're kind of in the very early stages of that. I know, Chris, does your area have anything better? Yeah.
I don't know if maybe the research programs presentation will get into this at all, but I'll just high level in the grants area, we've been working on some robotic process automation that helps, for example, gather data as it relates to invoice backup information. So there's what we call bots, and they actually go into the system and gather the different receipts and backup documentation that are needed for certain sponsors when an invoice is submitted. So that removes an actual employee having to do that work.
Anybody else? Now's your big chance.
Chris, I think it may be easier just to ask quickly. You had mentioned some training. What's the easiest way to reach out to you guys to either get access to that or follow up on that training question?
Yeah, I believe that if you go through ServiceNow, I think I'm not the expert in this area, but I think ServiceNow ticket would be a good place to start to request training. But I can follow up with you on that after this presentation.
One in here that Preeti is asking, would it be possible for SEBBRS to also include budget?
That seems like a technical question that I probably would need to look into. But certainly, if you want to reach out to me, we can have that discussion. All right. Well, we want to make sure there's some time for the next presentations to get set up. So if you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself or to Megan. And with that, thank you for attending today, and we hope that you guys enjoy the other presentations that we have.
Everybody.